Welcome back to another show of Revealed Apologetics with your host, Eli Ayala. And I am super excited today because we have a wonderful guest that I'll be interviewing to discuss the topic of the apologetic legacy of Dr. William Lane Craig of Reasonable Faith. And so I'm going to introduce our guest in just a few moments, just by way of quick announcements. I'm going to be having a couple of other interviews coming up with some very fascinating guests covering various topics that range from theology, apologetics, and all those other related areas. Also, if those of you who are following my ministry at any level, I will also be engaging in a debate on the topic, is there evidence for the God of the Bible, on June 2nd. So stay tuned for that as well. Today, I'm super excited because we're going to be talking about the legacy of William Lane Craig, who, if anyone knows me specifically, okay, they know I'm a Calvinist and they know that I'm a presuppositional apologist. And so you're probably wondering, why on earth do I have a good friend of Dr. Craig, Kevin Harris, who actually hosts the Reasonable Faith podcast? Why would I have someone like Kevin Harris on my show talking about the apologetic legacy of William Lane Craig? Well, if you are Reformed and you are a presuppositional apologist and you have a problem with that, you could always go to a different channel, because regardless of my theological perspective and my apologetic perspective, I would have to be living under a rock to not acknowledge the apologetic influence that Dr. Craig is having on, in the world of Christianity today. And more specifically, I would be very dishonest if I couldn't admit that Dr. Craig has had a profound influence on my own thinking. And so it's a great pleasure and a joy to have Kevin Harris here. And maybe one day we can get Dr. Craig as well. I have been very influenced by Dr. Craig's work, and I think Kevin Harris has done an amazing job asking the questions and sifting through material so that Dr. Craig can address those issues and can provide a great help to the body, even if there are those who come from different perspectives. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Kevin Harris. And if you want to take just a few seconds to tell folks about you, they probably know more about you than they would about me, but you can take a few moments to share a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Was in top 40 and rock radio for a long time, all during the 80s. Started when I was in high school and moved more toward production in the 90s. And I said, how can I use my gifts in radio and in production, and my love for apologetics and sharing my faith and sharing the cause of Christ? How can I somehow put those together and yet also be as mainstream as possible? Because I often think that we as followers of Christ miss opportunities by just going into the Christian world.
Sure. And
we need to learn how to, in God's grace, navigate the mainstream, because, well, that's where the people are, Right. And so I've tried to stay in the stream and be salt and light. I'm a salt and light guy. That takes a lot of discipline and maturity, to do that, because it can be treacherous, from time to time, and eat up by the big entertainment machine. But I think that we're really doing that with Reasonable Faith, with these podcasts.
It's interesting. My introduction to apologetics was interesting. It came through my study of eschatology. And so my brother-in-law actually was called upon to DJ a wedding at the last second, because the DJ had, for whatever reason, he was unable to do the wedding. And so he wanted to borrow my iPod, okay, and hook it up to some speakers and and use that for the music. And so after the wedding, he gave me my iPod back, and I'm listening through stuff, and he put music on there and a bunch of other audio material. And I was like, who's this William Lane Craig guy? Like, that was my first introduction to Dr. Craig and the Reasonable Faith podcast. And so from there, I have learned so much since then. And of course, I have Dr. Craig's book here. And I know folks who are involved in apologetics, this is a very well-known work. And as a teacher, prior to getting a job as a teacher, I was posted guard of the bathroom, doing bathroom duty as a permanent sub from the morning to the afternoon. And I spent my entire day guarding the bathroom like a boss and reading the living daylights out of this book. And so it was immensely helpful. And of course, in my study of Dr. Craig, I was very familiar with your soothing radio voice, which I have to admit, I've been listening to you for years before I actually saw what you look like. And I kind of see like, you don't look the same as the way you sound, which is usually the case with radio. Do you get that a lot?
Oh yeah. I and gosh, if you listen to a tape of me when I was 20,
okay,
to a tape of me when I'm 60, which is now,
okay,
that's how ancient I am. I still sound 20, and so if people see me and go, well, it's just part of it. Your voice kind of stays the same, but
sure.
But yeah, it's fun. It's so funny, the whole history of radio. Back when I started in radio, you had to have a radio voice and just really puke and do all that stuff. And MTV changed all that about 1981. I mean, everybody started. They were more casual. Hey, we got some music from Duran Duran coming up. Thanks for hanging out. And radio had to adapt because we all sounded like buffoons after we're talking like this, and then everybody else is casual. So that's one good thing, a little more transparent and a little more real, and the whole bit. And that's moved right on into what you're doing as well. We're having a conversation. The podcasts that I do with Dr. Craig are very conversational. I try to keep it on the lay level, which is not hard to do because I've still got some reading to do on some of the things that we discuss. So I ask from the position of a layman. What the average person is gonna ask. The thing about it is that people who listen to Reasonable Faith are so sophisticated for the most part that they're going, yeah, I've heard all that. But just think about, again, the mainstream, that there are a lot of people who are coming in and want to try to find that middle ground, as much as you can.
And I think that's very important, because I think one of the great tasks of the apologist is to kind of take that ivory tower material and bring it down to the everyday person, so it can be useful on the everyday level, as well as it's useful within that context of scholarship. And I think that's a very challenging thing to do, but I think you do it very well, because you're kind of like the inner voice in the layperson's head. Well, I want to ask this, and you ask it, and they're like, oh, there you go, he asked it. And so hearing you kind of interact with someone like Dr. Craig and the way you ask questions, I think is, to be honest, I think it's amazing on multiple levels, which is what I want to ask you about. One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, and of course, I mean, who wouldn't want to have Dr. Craig on as well? I mean, folks like him are very busy, and we understand how that goes. But as I've been listening to you, I have actually found that there is great apologetic insight in what you do, not merely with Dr. Craig answering the questions and doing the explanations and things like that. What do you think is the apologetic value of doing what you do, in the sense of researching material, sifting through good information and bad information, such that you can crystallize the issues in such a way that, yes, this is the package, this is what we're going to talk about, this is the important issue to address? How do you put your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the world around us, such that you give us relevant information?
First of all, a lot of people help. I mean, I get emails, and I need to put my email out there more often, because maybe I haven't done it as much. But even on Facebook, people will send me topics. Hey, you ought to do a podcast on this. Hey, what about this? And so people have help from all over the world. Italy, Brazil, Canada, and everywhere. And so that's one thing. And oh man, I have to go into the sewer of the
The
internet.
internet.
And I have to wade through all the horrible things that people
Sure.
say about Dr. Craig.
Right.
And we'll talk about that later if you want. I mean, he's
Sure.
the real deal. I'll just give you a spoiler alert. He is the real deal. I'll tell you straight up, and we'll talk about it. But I'll wade through there and kind of see what people see if I can. I'm pretty good at getting the buzz. What are people talking about? What's the chatter? I'll see what our atheist friends are talking about. Kind of wade through that and some things like that. And Dr. Craig he's a philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
He's a professional philosopher. He's not an apologist first. Apologetics just kind of comes out of that, and which is very valuable because we need to study philosophy and theology and all the disciplines and then culminate that into our apologetics. And so I will try to take his philosophical training and knowledge, which is like insane. He's such an egghead, but and then find the apologetic
Nugget
in there, mine that nugget, and bring it out so that we can use it in a practical way. And so that's what I try to do.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, can you say that again?
He's very accommodating of that because he'd rather talk about something else, and then I'll say, I'll get him down, I'll get him down off the top shelf. But again, I have to say that people are becoming more and more sophisticated. People in junior high, 7th grade, 8th grade, they know a lot these days. People are boning up on their apologetics and philosophy, so it's good.
So now, I guess a quick question for you before we move on to Dr. Craig is, can you speak to the idea of the apologetic value of what you do? I mean, what is it? What is so apologetically valuable to be able to differentiate between good material and bad material and zero in on those important issues?
Because you're going to run into not only some simple question that you've heard a million times from your brother-in-law, you're going to run into some of the most sophisticated, atheistic, non-Christian, materialistic philosophy out there. And it's becoming more and more necessary to really wade through that, have the basics down, and then build from there. But you a better standpoint. So I would say people tend to ask the same questions.
Sure.
They're certainly getting more sophisticated these days. I remember back in the day, apologetics was a secret weapon. I mean, all of us apologists were running around in the 70s and 80s cocky because we could knock your argument out of the park. And, well, all of a sudden the 90s hit and the internet hit. And I was shocked to find out that there were lots of my atheist friends who I didn't know too many until the internet actually knew these arguments too. And I go, this is no longer the secret evangelistic weapon.
Right.
For evangelism, we've got to be on our game and at the same time not lose sight of glorifying the Lord, because the tendency, of course, is to just get into a brawl and try to one up each other and stuff like that.
Right.
So.
And that's one of the things I appreciate with Dr. Craig is that he is in the heat of the philosophical conflicts and watching. I think I've watched almost every debate he has because I've been listening for a long time. And I have not, I can honestly say I have never seen him ever lose his cool in the midst of the conflict. And so even just for myself, I'm going to ask you the question, but just for myself, one of the things that I think Dr. Craig is a perfect example of is what a Christian gentleman looks like, regardless of what people might, other Christian brothers and sisters who may, share his philosophical and theological positions or whatever. No one can fault him for the godly character that he always presents, especially in the heat of conflict. And I think that's something very much that we all need to learn from. So I think that's important. All right. Well, let's shift now. We're talking about the apologetic legacy of Dr. Craig. And I'm going to ask you a question, and it's going to sound a little morbid, but it's not. You kind of get the spirit of what I'm going to ask. If Dr. Craig were to pass away and you were speaking at his funeral, how would you briefly summarize the impact he's had on you personally and the impact as you have perceived that he's had on the Christian world?
I'd walk out and I would open my Bible and I would say, the WLC. And then I would sit down.
Okay.
Because it's screamingly obvious. I mean, not that I can't answer the question, but he has somehow been given the grace to do these debates and these lectures and other things that have been so disseminated and so widespread that there's just a whole lot of people who know who he is and have been influenced by him.
Sure.
And overlap between Arminians, Calvinists, Molinists. I mean, we all share the same apologetic value on things. And so that's what he's done as well. And you pointed that out during the intro, which I thought was great, because while there are theological differences and things like that, there is a lot of common ground. And so he has been able to hone in on that.
Sure.
He's been able to show that he's got 3 rebuttals for anything that you can bring up. And so that says that makes people interested in learning.
Sure.
And not so you can one up somebody, but so that you can represent better, so that you can make a bigger impact, so that you can represent your faith better. And you're right. He is a gentleman. He genuinely cares, and he's charitable. He will give his opponent, his debate opponent, when he reads their material or if they say something, he'll give them the benefit of the doubt. He will try not to set up a straw man. He will try to really hone in on what they say and then interact with it. So this has captured a lot of people and electrified them.
Sure.
It's caused them to want to at least bone up. And a lot of people say, well, I'm going to debate like that. Well, I'm telling you, that takes a lot of research if you're going to have a mainstream debate thing. Debates are great. I used to do them. But it takes a lot of prep.
Well, let's just say Dr. Craig knows how to come prepared for a fight.
He really does. Yeah.
Now, less people, I could say from my knowledge of him as kind of just a person who's followed his work, he's got a razor sharp mind. Obviously, he's got a kind of charming and cheesy scholar sense of humor. So that kind of it's kind of like, it's cheesy, but it's Dr. Craig, so it's okay. But he uses that to his benefit when making some point that he wants to get across. And I think there is a balance to how he presents arguments, and he uses a mixture, as I see it, of the intellectual strength of the argument, along with the Christian character that's required to engage in those sorts of discussions, and kind of that little charm that he has to make a point. I think all of these things other apologists can learn from, in that we try to employ all of the things that God has given us to the purpose of promoting the gospel, giving an answer to those who who ask us for the reason for the hope that's in us. And I think he exemplifies that very very well. Now, on a more personal level, what kind of, for people who are only familiar with Dr. Craig at that professional level, what sort of person is he? When you're just having a basic conversation. I have a friend who is he's over at Trinity Radio. Radio is a Christian apologist. I believe he's the president of Trinity Bible College. I think there's a complicated name. It doesn't roll off the tongue. But Braxton Hunter, who had the pleasure of going with Dr. Craig and a few others on a trip to Israel, and I asked him a while back, how was Dr. Craig in that setting where he's kind of just hanging out and you guys are traveling along, and he's like, he's exactly the same. So I kind of get that consistent answer. Do you think that that Dr. Craig is a different Dr. Craig when he's kind of like laid back having normal conversations, or does he give you syllogisms for everything?
Well, what you see is what you get. He really cares about people, and he really cares about the arguments. And He's disturbed by misrepresentations
Mm.
of the Christian faith. He's disturbed by um, uh, unsophisticated, theology, that we need to be as sophisticated as we can in our theology
Sure.
and in our Bible knowledge in the grace of God. And so he's very passionate about that, but he cares about people. He started in ministry in college, working with young people, working with people in the dorm, and he really does care. If you'll listen to the podcast, Dr. Craig's Secret Weapon, his wife Jan,
That was great.
man, she is something, and she keeps him organized and has helped him.
Really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
In fact, we all need a Jan in our lives.
Sure.
My wife is pretty much that way. She's kind of like that, very practical, because Dr. Craig is thinking these, he's going over philosophy and theology and thinking about infinite regresses and vicious ones, and so he's in thought, and he's pouring everything into this, and that's hard to stay organized when you're doing this. Me, I'm a creative guy, and my brains are totally on that side.
Okay.
So it's hard for me to be organized, and I've learned from Jan, just from the over 10 years of watching her, because I'm thinking pink, blue colors, and I can be just a real scatterbrain.
Yeah. I suppose if we are to talk about the legacy of Dr. Craig, it's really impossible to talk about the legacy of Dr. Craig without mentioning the influence of his wife and being behind. I mean, that in that particular episode of Reasonable Faith, where you guys spoke about, Dr. Craig's secret weapon. I mean, it just goes to show the importance of having a significant other that stands behind you in your ministry and gives you the strength to emotional strength or whatever kind of support. That is a very, very important feature as to how an apologist or a minister or a pastor, whatever, can be effective to the best degree possible. I think that's amazing.
Yes, and he's very disciplined. Of course, Jan, I'm sure, has helped with that, but
sure.
He does this at this point and this at this point, and working from his home office. You have to, because it'd be very easy just to chill, as we're all finding out.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of discipline if you're going to, work out of your home.
Mm-hmm.
And he sticks to it. He has a time that he looks at email. He has a time that he's going to read. And he's up early in the morning.
If I could interrupt you there, I do apologize. I think people would be interested in this, and I know that Dr. Craig has mentioned it in articles because people have asked this question, but maybe you can kind of specify, what does a study day for Dr. Craig look like? Have you ever spoken about that with him? I mean, what time does he wake up? What does he like to read? How does that all work out throughout his day? Do you ever talk about that with him?
Yeah, I do. And he's been doing the same thing for a long time. He's very consistent, and that's why I think he's so effective. He is just he's up, I think, 4:30 in the morning, goes to bed early, gets up early, devotion straight off the bat. He gets up and he will read a passage, then he'll read a report or something that he's interested in.
Sure.
That's more devotional rather than philosophical. Like, for a while he was going through the church fathers, and for a while he was going through his devotions. For a while he was going through the growth of the church in different areas, and so he knew a lot about that. And then he prays, works out. He's got a muscular ailment that he has to really keep an eye on. He eats right. Jan sees to that. He's in really good shape. He has struggled with that health issues, but he has stayed on top of it. And so he gets exercise. And then he probably hits that study right towards 7 o'clock in the morning and goes till 5, and
Wow.
so, or sometimes longer.
Yeah.
But
So the key thing is consistency.
yes, and he won't check email. This is insane to me, because we have phone. I mean, I got to check this thing every
Sure.
5 seconds, and email. He very seldom will he ever check it before 5 in the afternoon.
Sure.
If they're
Wow.
important, Jen will come down and let him know. But he really sticks to it.
Well, that's actually, it makes me feel really special because Dr. Craig is a high-class philosopher. He's renowned around the world. I reach out to people all the time to do interviews like this, and it's very hard to get in touch with people. And there are people who I've messaged multiple times, and just I acknowledge people are busy, and I reach out, no responses. But I have to say, I have reached out to Dr. Craig on Facebook, and he has responded to
Good.
every even if it's a quick question. Hey, what Bible translation do you use? It gives me the time of day. And I think for me, he doesn't know who I am. I'm just a friend on Facebook. And I think someone of his stature who recognizes the impact that he's having, I think when he's able to, he finds it important to say hello or to answer a person's question. I think that's really difficult to maintain everything you're doing and also pay attention to the people that are not really involved in your life, but you're just kind of aware of even your Facebook profile or something like that. I think that's very, I think it says a lot about his character.
I'll guarantee you he'll be on your show. He's doing a lot more interviews these days.
Yeah.
I'll hook you up as well because
no, I appreciate that.
Him to be on. It'd be great for him to be on. So
yeah.
He's doing a lot more interviews these days.
Yeah.
So,
well, I would greatly appreciate that. I'd love to have him.
You bet.
But then now, when we're speaking about the legacy of Dr. Craig, what do you think, in your estimation, is the impact that he's making in the world of atheism? I mean, how do atheists around the world, people that he debates, how is he being perceived on the philosophical landscape today, as you see it?
I think the respect for him has grown among the atheist, agnostic, non-Christian, anti-theistic community. For a while, everything you read was just horrible. It was all ad hom. And, if you think about it, suppose, that there was a Mormon apologist who was so good and so smooth and so effective and had 3 answers to everything that you said and was an outstanding debater. It'd be, you'd kind of go, get a little sour grapes there. I know. Let's see if we can find something on this guy.
Okay.
So, and which is not charitable, and it's not Christ-like to do that. But a lot of it has been just because he's been so effective, and his argumentation his arguments are good, and he's been consistent. So I see a growing admiration for him, and there are others who have always admired him, who are very prominent in the new atheist movement in some of that group, and who were around before all that happened in the early 2000s. Who always admired him and are good friends with him. So that's good. Somebody asked me the other day, Dr. Craig he started kind of having an impact with the Willow Creek debate in the 90s, late 90s. And because Zindler, the guy that he debated, was just real formidable, and people were very.
I watched that debate multiple times, by the way.
Man, did he hit a brick wall. And I watched that on like a VHS. I bought that debate at VHS, and I was stunned. And I started calling Dr. Craig to interview him on my show, because I thought he did such a good job without being snarky.
Yeah.
And that kicked it. And then I was at a debate in Dallas, Texas, right around 98, 99, wherever it was. When he debated Parsons, there were 4,000 people at that big mega church.
Yeah.
There was overflow. And that was a very I mean, that just launched this explosion.
Sure.
And they go, look, if he exploded, and we've seen this renaissance of apologetics, which we have,
Sure.
and and believers and followers of Christ are finally starting to see the value in this, which they're supposed to do biblically, all of us. Why did the atheist movement, the new atheist, hit right after 9/11 and just grow so big if you guys had such an impact? All I can tell you is, imagine what it would be like had he not had that impact, had there not been impact from Ravi Zacharias and Norman Geisler and others when it was just growing. It was almost as if God was kind of prepping the planet for that, because it was going to come as a result of 9/11, for the most part, the four horsemen of the atheists, the new atheists and things like that. And so, boom, a lot of people were ready.
Yeah. And that Zindler debate, I think that might have been the first debate I had ever seen Dr. Craig do. And one thing that amazed me was just his razor sharp intellect and an ability to kind of recall certain facts. I think it was something where he mentioned a quotation from Josephus, I think, where him actually just saying the quote and the reference where it was found actually brought the audience to a chuckle. People were laughing like, are you serious? I mean, he was like on page this, paragraph that. And on the one hand, you could see that as, wow, what a smart guy this guy is. But on the other hand, what an encouragement and an inspiration for believers to value the facts so much that in our own engaging within the apologetics context, that we learn to memorize certain facts and Bible verses and arguments and things like that. I think that was the big impact that Dr. Craig had on me. On the one hand, of course, I mean, he's a razor sharp guy, and I think a lot of people are attracted to his work because he is a brilliant mind. But at the same time, what an amazing example. I mean, he definitely puts that bar up there. I'm like, well, I'm not going to be at the next William Lane Craig anytime soon, but sure, I can learn from some of those things that he's doing. That he can speak so much over the head sometimes that you feel like you've accomplished something if you grab just a little piece, but like, oh, okay, I think I was able to wrap my head around. And that is helpful. It's useful, and it speaks both to the lay person as well as to the people with a more scholarly bent. I think that's why I think I read an article just on Reasonable Faith not that long ago, which it's an older article, but he was talking a little bit about how he double dips with his work. On the one hand, he will write something that is scholarly in nature, but then he'll take that information, kind of retweak it a little bit and provide something for the layperson. And I think that right there is striking that balance that I think he does so well.
Yeah, I think so too. And another thing, because of his position, that by the grace of God he has attained, because of these major secular or mainstream colleges that he goes to, the highest echelons.
Sure.
He'll read what his opponent has written or look at a few videos or something. And that's part of that charity that he's talking about, that I was talking about. He's charitable. He'll say, well, what do you believe? What do you think? And then he'll know what they're going to say.
Right.
For the most part. And that's why sometimes studying, they'll say, Bertrand Russell said somewhere that, and then Dr. Craig will get up and say, yeah, that was on page 28. Bertrand Russell said, well, I've got it right here.
That is such an important piece.
I've seen him do that. And that's because he's read their work.
Sure.
And so and you can benefit from reading people's work, but you can also test it and see where you think the person's wrong and what a Christian response will be.
Right.
And so that's part of that preparation.
Right. And I think that principle of charity is a key point. Another apologist that does that well. And I say this with caution because he can be rough around the edges and there's always controversy surrounding him. And he doesn't always have nice things to say about Dr. Craig, but Dr. James White over at Alpha and Omega Ministries, definitely different perspective. Right. But what I've noticed between Dr. Craig and Dr. White is that in their debates, they go out of their way to read the other side. And I think that's something that principle of charity, that you don't want to present your argument and not care what the other person has to say, even if you disagree with it.
Yeah.
But I think what you've explained with regards to how Dr. Craig studies, where he begins his day with devotional material, there needs to be that balance, that if you're going to be immersing yourself in the work of unbelievers, that you also need to be catering to your spiritual formation and your devotion time and things like that. Why don't you speak a little bit to that? Why is that such a vital aspect of not just being a Christian in general, but doing apologetics in particular?
Yeah. And by the way, James White has had such a great impact on me as well. I mean, I used to watch him on the John Ankerberg show, which really was very formative in the 80s when he had that afro, you know. I've been watching him for a long time and admire his abilities. If I were, I hope the devil doesn't hear this. If I were the devil, William Lane Craig is one of the people I'd really try to go after.
Sure.
Because he has had an impact. There are plenty of people that I would try to go after. And so, man, he does recognize that. It's very humbling. And so he's very consistent in his prayer life, in his devotion life. It really is an inspiration, because he's under attack, and it could be a lot worse. And I know a lot of people are praying for him because of his position.
Sure.
But it gets very humbling. And you better know that, especially online, we've all learned when this happened in the mid-90s, and we all started getting on and doing our apologetics online.
Sure.
When the internet was new, we had to learn not to get bent out of shape with each other.
Say that again. Your voice kind of skipped out. But what can you say that again?
We had to learn not to get all bent out of shape with each other. We had to learn to be charitable and loving, because, man, there were some knockdown dragouts, and still, it still is. And you want to, you could just easily start getting into ad homs.
Right.
But he really sees the importance of that. He really sees the need to ask for God's grace and really protection, because man, I would think he'd be a big target.
And I think that's an important piece to keep in mind. There's that balance. People can be so obsessed with apologetics that that's all they focus on, and there's an imbalance in their own spiritual life, and that's a detriment in and of itself as well.
I've been there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You go into that mode and just start kind of just depending on that one aspect of your life. And then all of a sudden you're not doing what you told everybody else to do. Love the Lord your God with all your strength, with all your heart, with all your mind. Right. And us apologists are saying, look, guys, y'all leaving the mind part out of it, And so there's been a very anti-intellectual movement that we've had to deal with in the church.
Yeah.
A lot of it, unfortunately, came out of the charismatic movement, some of the excesses of that.
Sure.
And that's not all. I'm not trying to paint with a very broad brush, but there has been a real anti-intellectualism. So we've been trying to get them to come along in that area.
Sure.
In this meantime, they've been trying to get us to come along in the heart area.
Yeah.
So there is that balance.
That's very true. Well, let's shift gears here. And I think those are super important points to keep in mind, because I don't want to keep going on it, because we can speak on that. That's a topic worthy of an episode in and of itself. The importance of keeping that devotional balance, and that, a fully robust, spiritually healthy life. A good apologist is one who is also being obedient to God in those other areas, right? Because I'm sure you are aware that it is quite possible to do apologetics unbiblically. we can. Right. So let's leave that aside. That's very important. We give some folks something to think about. Now, kind of a fun question here. If you had to identify your favorite Reasonable Faith episode, in which after you were done with it, you were like, man, that was a great conversation. Dr. Craig was on point on these issues, and I think people are really impacted by that. What would you identify as your favorite Reasonable Faith episode?
Wow. Well, one of my favorite episodes is because um, Dr. Craig, he really gets into a zone, and I do too, where we don't let our emotions show. You know, we're trying to do all this, and we kind of key off of each other, the guys, you know, a couple of men, but we both got emotional
Sure.
several times, and one of them was Dr. Craig's secret weapon, talking about Jan, and I let it in. I could have edited it out, but you could hear you get getting choked up at the end if you listen to that. That's one of them. I don't know. Sometimes we are so excited about a topic
Sure.
that it'll really come out. This fight is fun, but the West Wing episode that we did,
Oh yeah.
homosexuality, a Christian response to homosexuality, that has helped a lot of people, because I think we got some definitions down that needed to be gotten down, and some aspects of the issue of homosexuality that needed to be spelled out, and that we needed to be a little more precise in our terminology and some things, because it was just all kind of weird stuff. And I think he did a good job on that. Our compassion and love, but at the same time, spelling out what we need to do as a church for people same-sex attracted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of a big that West Wing episode that, you know, that a lot of people have pointed to as nailed all you Christians, you know.
Sure.
In that episode.
It's
And
well
so,
written. It's well written. It is quick, and it ties things together. It hits all the stereotypical ways of looking at that particular topic with Old Testament laws and how you would apply it today. And it was sharp. And of course, you have someone like what was it, Michael Douglas, who played the president or something like that. Was it Michael Douglas?
Martin Sheen. Martin.
Oh, Michael Douglas. There we go. Sheen. There we go. Martin Sheen.
Michael Douglas did play though.
Okay. I remember the episode. I don't remember the actual episode of the show. I remember the Reasonable Faith episode.
Yeah.
Okay. And so let me ask you a more subtle question, and maybe you can answer it, maybe you can't. I asked you what your favorite episode was. What do you think is the most important episode that you've done? That afterwards you're like, hey, this is a central issue that people need to get down. They're talking about it. And after coming away from that episode, you were like, yes, this is going to be very helpful and important to the church as people listen in.
Well, we've done several on same-sex attraction, sexuality, and some things that I think are really going to help. There are 3 or 4. Okay. All of them I think are good. And so those have been important, because for so long, I mean, we had to resist. That's all people. In the last several years, all people have wanted to know, what does Dr. Craig think about gender issues and things like that? And he's disciplined enough where he will stay in his lane. And so he has to, sometimes we're in territory that's not his specialty, like social. What am I trying to say? Social issues and things like that, where you have to be pretty versed in sociology and culture. Sure. And things like that. And so people want to know what he has to say about these things, and I'll push him from time to time. Bill, you're going to have to talk about this, even if you just go pastoral. You know, maybe just offer some of the insight and things like that. Most of the time, he goes, I need to stay in my lane. This is my area, you know. But
yeah.
But anyway, so we do get into important cultural and social issues from time to time, and some of those I think have been very important, but probably not as important as some of the stuff that we've done on cosmology and the kalam, and the design argument, the moral argument, Platonism and things like that, because that will give you a foundation by which to launch against and tear down these arguments effectively. collectively, because all of them will have tentacles
Sure.
from these views, from these worldviews, from this philosophy,
Right.
these philosophies that we need to evaluate and be able to respond to. And so, and obviously, boy, that's really hard. I'd have to really think for a while, but his work on the atonement is also very, very important,
Mm.
because again, we'd kind of gotten lazy on the atonement in the church, it seems to me, and we kind of scattered out and didn't really know what we believed. And so his work on the atonement, for a lot of people, he's tightened that back up
Mm.
biblically and philosophically to where it really needs to be.
Okay.
Have a more rigorous view of the atonement, because
Sure. Sure.
you know, we were all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I've read a lot of his work, not specific, although I might have something on I think I have this little book over here on the atonement here that I have not read yet, but I eventually will get. I mean, there's just so much to read, but I definitely want to get to, maybe if I wake up at 4:30 in the morning, maybe I'll have time to, you would think Dr. Craig, when he wakes up, he's spending at least a half hour on social media. Yeah, there you go.
Half of those.
He's like, this is a green screen background, so they're not even real. Now, you said something very important, and I think is very useful for people, is when you're talking a little bit about how Dr. Craig knows to stay in his lane. Please unpack the importance of this within the context of apologetics, because if you're familiar with online apologetics, everyone's an expert, right? Everyone's an expert on the topic. And so they try to speak to areas, Christians will try to speak to areas that they have no business speaking in. Why don't you tell us the value of knowing to stay in your own lane, and kind of use Dr. Craig as the example there, even being who he is. He's kind of the guy to go to in the area of apologetics for a lot of people, but he still knows, hey, that's not my area.
Yeah. It's okay to know a little bit about everything. By the way, the air conditioner just kicked on.
That's okay.
If I need to run over there and turn it off, I will, if it's
okay.
The compressors in it. But it's great to know and have a well-orbed, be educated on a whole lot of things. But where are your gifts? Where are your passions? That's a gift from God. And it probably was when you were 6, 7, 8 years old, it was beginning to form. And so just look at your whole life and say, yeah, where is it that I can be most effective? What are my areas of interest, that I do well? And I think that all of us have to do that. But I'm telling you, when you get online, and you get in these chat rooms back in the day, and in some of the forums now, people ask a billion questions.
Sure.
And so the pressure is to know it all. I have done so many podcasts with Platonism, on Platonism with Dr. Craig, but I've put that off a little bit. I need to bone up on that so much more. And I am interested in the topic, but there's still a lot that I need to read.
Sure.
In that, so I'll try to get to it, and when I can. But and then I had to decide for me as well. I'll tell you this. Well, am I going to be a person who teaches and who debates and who lectures in apologetics because I'm so overwhelmed with the topic, or am I going to use my stronger gifts, production, radio, podcasting,
sure,
creativity, music, and all that, and facilitate those who have the education? So for a while there, thinking, do I need to go back to school? And that'd be great. Do I need to get my PhD, in order to do this? And no, you don't have to be smart. You just have to be informed.
Sure.
And so, and you can be largely self-taught. But there are a lot of people who, they do need to get their PhD. They do need to go to seminary. They need to be teaching. They need to be lecturing and debating and writing. and doing that. But not everybody
Sure.
has got that. And then those guys need you and me, as well, who've got some of the creative things going on in the interview process and what's happening.
Yeah. Now I've engaged in some debates online as well, and some on YouTube that are available on my YouTube channel. And I tell people right away, I have, and this is removing the burden off the shoulders of the apologist. And I think this would be helpful. Just what I'm about to share about myself and what I'll share about Dr. Craig is that if someone asks a question, it is a great, powerful apologetical tool to say, I don't know. That's a great question. let me go back, because that shows that you respect where the person's coming from, and that caters to prolonging the interaction. The people don't just look at you as kind of you're just trying to pull an answer out of thin air. I think there is a great apologetical, God-honoring value in admitting when you don't know something. And I've never heard Dr. Craig in a debate say, "Well, I'm not sure about that." Maybe he has, but I did remember his debate with Hector Avalos, in which Hector Avalos pointed out an error in one of Dr. Craig's books, I believe. And I was like, oh my goodness, is this true? And you're going back and forth the first time, and how is Dr. Craig going to respond? And Dr. Craig, if I remember correctly, admitted the error and says, yeah, I got to change that. And I was so drawn aback by the integrity of, here you have Hector Avalos, who was just really going for the jugular and putting Dr. Craig in a corner. And Dr. Craig had no problem saying, yeah, that's something I need to go and fix. And not only did that not derail Dr. Craig, his argument still came on top. Even if you granted the error there, he was able to be the gentleman, show his honesty in the discussion, and mount a great defense for the resurrection. Yes,
Absolutely. I've seen him do that a few times where he'll go, no, got to change that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the publisher. If you're in publishing, you got to make sure that they get it right too.
Right.
Somebody online will, you get an email from somebody who's reading on page 432, some kind of thing, and you go, I didn't put that in there. And so you got to go back and, that'll happen from time to time. But yeah, just be transparent, be authentic.
Sure.
Not right at all costs.
Yeah.
Be willing to just humbly say, well, yeah, you're right. But boy, the debates that he's done for the most part have never been that way. I mean, the issues were clear cut.
Yeah.
They were large and just demanded rigorous philosophical, theological answers and responses, both defensive and offensive. And
right. Now, what would you say is your favorite debate that he's engaged in? What do you think? When you watched it, you were kind of like, man, that was a great back and forth. There's a lot of meat here. People are going to find this valuable.
Yeah. There are a lot of good ones. Probably the Zindler debate had the biggest impact on me because it launched this whole thing.
Okay.
I eventually called Dr. Craig and said, Bill, I've been, for a long time, I've been interviewing you. We need to do our own show for radio. And he goes, yeah, some people tell me that this podcasting thing is going to be a big deal. Maybe we need to do that. Said, okay, well, let's try to do both. So we are looking toward, looking forward to doing some radio as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, God. I see that I have 1% power left on this. I'm going to have to plug this in here in just a minute.
Yeah. Go, why don't you take a few moments and I'll just make a couple of announcements there. You want to plug that in now?
See if I can find the plug. Yeah.
All right. Well, folks, I hope you guys are enjoying this discussion. I love this sort of stuff. I know a lot of people like to just jump into some theological issues and apologetical issues, but I love to take an influential thinker and kind of look at their legacy, look at the impact that they're making, study learn about the different ways that the person studies. I like to learn about those sorts of things. And so I hope you guys are enjoying this, especially coming from Kevin Harris, who knows Dr. Craig very well. So we kind of get like an insider scoop, so to speak. Now, of course, those of you who know my own theological and apologetical convictions, of course, I am Reformed. I'm a Calvinist. Dr. Craig obviously is not. Okay. And I'm a presuppositionalist in my apologetic methodology. But at the same time, one of the goals that I have with doing this ministry, Revealed Apologetics, obviously is to promote apologetics in general. And being a presuppositionalist, promoting presuppositional apologetics specifically. But one of my goals also is to build bridges between the differing apologetic methodologies, because without compromising one's apologetic convictions, you can still find benefit from interacting with other material and seeing kind of the value that other apologists from different methodologies, the value that they can bring to our study of apologetics. And so I want to just kind of encourage people not to be so narrow that they just can't stand learning something from someone who doesn't agree with them, right? And of course, we're not undermining those disagreements. Obviously, certain disagreements are, they're a big deal. I think apologetic methodology is important. I think the issues of Calvinism, Arminianism, and Molinism, those issues are important. We don't want to downplay those things. But I think we need to learn to live with certain differences, seek to understand what the other side is saying. And then what you'll find is just as there are inaccurate representations of a presuppositional apologetics, sometimes there can be inaccurate representations of the presuppositional representing the classical side or the evidential side. And so I think these are important things to keep in mind. I am by no means compromising my strong convictions. I'm a very ardent follower of the presuppositional methodology. I have very high regard for Dr. Cornelius Van Til and Greg Bonson, but I do not want to eliminate many of the other resources that are out there within the Christian community that can serve a great purpose. Now, I just want to ask you guys for just a few minutes. I'm going to try to reconnect with Kevin here, and let's see if I can get him back on. I think in his attempt to reconnect, let's see here that there is a connection issue. Let's see. Just bear with me, folks. Okay. And connect. All right, let me see here. Okay, so I've sent Kevin the link here. Can someone give me a heads up if you guys can hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. I'm going to put Kevin back on. Let's see here. And you are back on.
Sorry about that.
That is quite all right. No worries at all. While you were gone, I was just talking about the importance of being able to benefit from those whom we disagree. Again, as I mentioned before, I am a presuppositional apologist. I am very heavily read in Cornelius Van Til and Dr. Greg Bonson. But I've always had a great appreciation for the classical tradition. And I do think that the methodological differences are important. But I think that a lot of people have seen these differences in such a way that they've seen no value in looking at the other side and saying, hey, that's actually a really useful thing. Let's see if we can benefit from the different methodologies. And we may have different theological convictions, but there's definitely kind of a how can I say this? There's a way to benefit even with those with whom we disagree. And my goal is to build bridges not only between presuppositionalists and classicalists, but with Calvinists and Molinists and Arminians. Again, not to undermine the differences. We have those strong convictions, but let's talk about them. And I think a lot of people are so narrow-minded in the sense that, nope, this is where I stand, and I'm not even going, heresy, and that we throw that word around a lot. And so I was just talking about how we need to be careful about that.
Oh, yeah. And there's so much value to read each other and to find out where you come down on a particular issue and why.
Right.
But if you're not reading Bonson, if you're not, if you don't avail yourself of stuff that James White is saying and what he's written, you're ripping yourself off. I mean, there's some good stuff, and so don't be so narrow and convinced. You're exactly right. These are, as you say, important issues. They're still peripheral,
Right.
but they are important. So we hold to the essentials, of course, 101, but the peripheral issues can be very important as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we can learn a lot from each other. A lot of these are in-house debates, and I'm a little more charity. For a while, we were kind of going after everybody's the Calvos were in the precept.
The Calvos.
Yeah, I mean, and it just really getting in each other's grill, and I'm saying, enough, guys, come on.
Right.
And now I'm seeing a little more dialogue, and I'm seeing some good-natured ribbing each other.
Right. Well, that's what I'm trying to do here with this show. I usually get, if I'm not doing something myself and teaching something apologetically or theologically, I like to have, conversations. For example, we did have James White on this show critiquing Molinism. And of course, I had Tim Stratton over at Free Thinking Ministries to come and respond to Dr. White's critique of Molinism. So you could hear both sides. And I think regardless of where you stand, that's a useful tool. I mean, you can learn from hearing both. Because what I find as I'm a Calvinist, I used to be a Molinist. And I used to, before that, hold to a different position. But when I came out of Molinism, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, like I came out of it like it was some cult or something. That's not what I mean. But when I came out of it, I did notice that a lot of the critiques that were offered by my Calvinist brothers were misrepresentations. Yeah. And so, again, I'm a Calvinist. Someone just made a comment. Eli keeps touching his face. That's a no-no. I'm so sorry. I have to be careful of what's going on over here. But I think having these kinds of conversations open up those gateways of communication so that even if you disagree in the end, at least you understand the person's perspective more accurately.
Think about Matt Slick. Matt Slick had one of the first Christian websites
That's
in
right.
the history of the planet, Carl. That's right. Christian Apologetics Research Ministry. Gosh, I guess it was the mid-90s. He got good at that. He got good at making a website and bulletin boards and and these debate boards and stuff like that. Early, he just had a knack for it. He got Calm launched, and we all just flocked there. We learned so much from that, and he's Calvinist, and I've stayed in Matt's house a couple of times with his family. I mean, we have this great relationship.
I didn't know that. Matt's a good friend of mine. I didn't know that you guys were connected anyway.
And so we learned to. He's invited me to speak to some of his conferences and some things like that. We just learned. Where to be close and be friends, despite some peripheral differences,
Sure. Yeah. Now we're going to try to wrap things up, and I want to kind of bring it back to Dr. Craig, but I think those are important conversations to have. And I think the communication between the different groups and different perspectives and things like that, bridges need to be built, and they don't always have to be built within the context of debate. And so a lot of people might be frustrated with Dr. Craig, for example, when he doesn't want to debate other Christians. And so you have the people who are very hungry. Well, we want to hear how he would defend against this person. And they're so obsessed with this, and I'm guilty of that too. I'd love to see, Dr. Craig and someone like James White hash out, apologetic methodology or Calvinist. It was interesting, but at the same time, I kind of understand where Dr. Craig is coming from. I think he has a good sense, and maybe you can kind of confirm this. I think he has a good sense of the importance of the work that he's doing, that he doesn't want to veer off to engage in some of these never-ending kind of disputes that are kind of in-house, that are important, like you mentioned, but are not necessary for what he's doing. Would I be correct there?
Yeah. Mission statement, you can read the mission statement, and also his personal mission statement is he will lecture and debate in the top colleges and universities in the world with some of the top scholars in the world. And that's what he's been given the grace to do. A lot of people would do a really good job at debating some of these top atheist scholars,
sure,
but they won't get ants because they don't have the credentials and, and things like that. And you can get the whole credentials debate and things like that. You got to be assistant as you can with your strategy. And I think there'll be some really good debates from non-PhD people who would like to debate Dr. Craig, but he's just trying to be consistent, knowing how academia works.
Sure.
And how, and if you're going to continue to be invited back, it's going to have to be a certain decorum and strategy and some things like that. But at the same time, if you look on reasonablefaith.org around the website, you'll see that he has interacted with theologians who Christian, Orthodox, and evangelical even on some of those in-house debates in print. Yeah. So he tends to do those just responding in bills and things like that. And the public debates, he's more interested in doing what I spelled, and that is, debate the materialist, the atheist, the agnostics, the scholars,
And I think that's a very important to. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Your voice skipped out. I didn't want to speak over you.
I'm saying that's him, but I am glad to see good interactions and even debates between brethren, between Christian scholars on some of these issues, so that we can be educated on them.
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize too that we live in a very visual society, and so everyone looks at these YouTube videos, the podcast and things like that. And I think people need to understand. I think people know this, but they don't really. It doesn't really process in their minds. Dr. Craig is a scholar, and the majority of his work is in scholarship, research, and writing. And so these debates, although very popular, is not the main focus of what he's all about. And so to his defense, especially for many of my Calvinist friends who wishes he would debate some person, whoever that might be, we have to grant him that even though he hasn't engaged in a lot of public debates on in-house issues, he has addressed those issues in writing that's available for people. So we can't act as though those things don't exist. If you're interested in what Dr. Craig thinks about those areas, read those materials. Just because he doesn't cater to our visual audio sensibilities to touch on the topics we wish he would, he has addressed those in writing, and I think people need to avail themselves of that. And guess what? If you disagree with him, okay, that's what the material's there for, so you can work with and grapple with. And I think he does that quite charitably.
It's really a matter of sticking with your strategy.
Sure.
Because people say, why doesn't Dr. Craig debate Matt Dillahunty, the big atheist spokesman who does the show down in Austin? Well, it's not a pride thing. It's not an arrogant thing. It's just a strategy thing. And that's a good debate, Yeah. But Jeffrey J. Lauder, has wanted to debate Dr. Craig for a long time. And there's great admiration for Dr. Craig. But to Dr. Craig's credit, he has stuck with a strategy, and again, he knows kind of behind the scenes how academia works.
Sure.
If you get into too much, what they'll could be fluffy, it could harm your ability to be invited for a lecture series or for a debate, sure, or to write in one of the journals to be published, and all those things that we don't tend to know as lay people. But I do want to see good, some good debates on doctrine,
Yeah.
And so we can start working on and have a clearer aspect of God's sovereignty, human responsibility. Okay, what are the views of free will? A lot of people need to know that. People do need to know that, and so there's a lot of room for it. It's just Dr. Craig. He's kind of got a strategy. He's probably going to stick to it.
Now, okay, so we're going to try to wrap things up a little bit. I'm going to ask you one question, which is a reiteration of the first question I asked you. One of the first questions I asked you. And it overall, if we were to summarize, then, if someone were to say, Kevin, what do you think is the overriding legacy of Dr. Craig now, and a legacy that you perceive him to leave behind when he's gone? How would you answer those two questions? What is his legacy now, And what is his legacy as you perceive that one day when he's no longer with us? What does he leave behind that is a great benefit to the church?
He has probably been instrumental in being the Kalam cosmological argument and various cosmological arguments. That needs to be in the forefront. We all stand on the shoulders of giants, just like he does. But and he loves Alvin Planck, has great admiration for Dr. Flanagan, but he's really brought the Kalam front and center. His work on the atonement, I think, is very strong. And I want to tell you what I think is going to happen. I think he's, again, by the grace of God, he's going to be very instrumental on where we are on Eve, the historical Adam and Eve. All the biblical, the scientific, archaeological, geological, genealogical questions and all these things that are some of the new scholarships that's coming out. I think he's, for some reason, a lot of this is moved toward him. And he's facilitating some people like Josh Swamidas, who've done a lot of good work, and kind of giving them a platform as well, and figuring out, well, in light of some of the new stuff, Bill is saying, and Dr. Craig is saying himself, where do I fall on this? In light of some of the newest evidence. And what is the newest evidence and things like that?
Sure.
And so you're going to see a lot of work coming out and also being either inspired or facilitated from Dr. Craig on this question.
Yeah.
So he hopes that his work on the Kalam and the atonement leaves a legacy. But I'm telling you, I think that that this Adam and Eve question and some of the newest stuff that's coming out, and it's all good. There's nothing. I don't think anything really radical going on there. And another thing is, he seems to think sometimes that when he's gone, when the Lord calls him home, that'll be it as far as reasonable faith and the legacy and things like that. I don't want that to happen. And personally, I don't. Not that, his work is going to be around forever, but I want to continue to build on some of the stuff that he's put in motion. And he's not going anywhere anytime soon. He works out. And he's right.
I could tell. I've seen some pictures, man. He's got some pretty big guns for a guy his age. Yeah. Now, I do think that there is one piece of advice that I can give to Dr. Craig, measly little me. If I can give any advice to Dr. Craig, if he wants his arguments to be sharper and more powerful, is he needs to grow back his beard, because he sounds much more convincing. I don't know. Every time I watch those older debates with that beard, man, he sounds brilliant. I mean, he sounds brilliant either way, but the beard, it's got power that he needs to tap into again. What do you think about that?
It's hilarious. It's funny that the memes that come out are about Dr. Craig and his beard,
That's right.
And I don't know, I'm going to try to bring the mullet back.
You can do it.
My contribution to Apologetics is bringing the mullet back, 1988. But
listen, we don't need the mullet anymore. If you bring back the mullet, people are just it's gonna add more ammunition to the problem of evil. If God is good, why do mullets exist? Come on.
Exactly right. Exactly. So.
All right. Are there any closing words you'd like to leave us with, or a word of encouragement or something before we wrap things up?
I think we've covered a lot of good bases. Eli, I appreciate your emphasis on getting along in-house, finding where we have common ground, because we do have the Great Commission that we're working toward together, and being charitable and being loving, not trying to just stand under a waterfall, and take it all in at the same time, because there's a lot of information out there. But to learn as you go, find out where you specialize. But I will tell you this: I'm a guy in Texas. I'm pretty parent, I pretty much tell it like it is. He is the real deal. He is a genuine, caring individual who loves God, who loves his family, and who loves everything he engages with. He's got to be firm because of the onslaught of naturalism, materialism, atheism, and all these things. But he really is a decent, caring human being. And I've had a lot of, we do these podcasts and we break for lunch, and we try not to talk about apologetics and philosophy. We try to get around other topics. And I've been doing this for over 10 years, going to lunch with him.
Sure.
And I can just tell you, he's a real deal. We've been vulnerable. And then we'll go to dinner when Jan will come along. And so they are an admirable couple. They have a great marriage. It's almost ridiculous. It's like
it almost makes you sick.
Those pet names call each other. I'm just like, on the cell phone going, would you enough already? Yeah. So they have a tremendous relationship. And I'll tell you a secret. A while back, as good as their relationship was, they said, why not avail ourselves of some marriage counseling? I mean, if there's anybody who's not a candidate, it's those two, And I said, what? And they said, well, I mean, why not improve? Why not, maybe you can't always see things. And so they actually talked to a counselor friend of theirs, and it strengthened their marriage even more, And so, anyway, there is a great heart behind that great mind. God has given him both. Pray for him. He's got some physical challenges, and then he's got the spiritual challenges that I think anybody that is in his position is going to have. And so,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. By the way, Kevin, my birthday is in July, but we can pretend my birthday is like a couple of weeks from now, and your gift to me could be getting me Dr. Craig on this show. I'd love to interview him. I'm a very happy camper.
You're on. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you being on, and I think you give a very unique perspective on the work that Dr. Craig is doing. And I think with that gift that you have to take complicated things and kind of simplify them for the average listener, I think that is in itself an apologetic valuable thing. And so, of course, everyone wants to hear the arguments and things like that. But as you mentioned before, that issue of strategy, I think that's an important strategy to have, to be able to not only listen to what the scholar's saying, but listen to the kinds of questions that are being asked that are touching on those very important issues. And I think and that makes you in your own right a very useful apologetic tool for people who are listening. And so kudos to you.
Thank you.
And I appreciate it. So, guys, that's going to wrap up the show for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to also be using the audio to put on the Revealed Apologetics podcast. If you have not already, please subscribe to Revealed Apologetics on YouTube. And of course, I would not imagine anyone who does apologetics and is not already a regular listener to Reasonable Faith. But of course, I would point you over to Reasonable Faith as well. Their podcast, YouTube channel, and their website has many great resources there that I think people will find very, very helpful and useful. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much. If you guys have any Bible questions or anything, apologetics questions, you can email me at revealedapologetics@gmail.com. That's it for today. Take care and God bless. Bye-bye.